In this series, we've been talking about stress. Now, I think stress is one of those universal conditions, something we all deal with in different ways. And today we're going to talk about one specific way we deal with stress, and that's in our family. Whether you have a family of your own or whether you're single, this one's still for you. We all deal with family stress. There's something about family that just equals stress sometimes. Maybe it's part of God's sense of humor. He takes more than one broken human being, puts them together in close quarters, and then just lets the fireworks happen. Every year, my 68-year-old introverted mother has to prepare a Thanksgiving feast for about 50 people. Not only that, but she has to allow extended family and their dogs and everything else to stay in her house for several days. Meanwhile, my dad orchestrates a flag football game with 100 people in attendance in our backyard, and my mom has to play hostess. Inevitably, she ends up breaking down, yelling at my father, resenting all the extended family for their dogs and their lack of awareness and sensitivity. Her anxiety and stress level during the holidays is at maximum and doesn't decrease until December 26th. And what I've noticed from being at home during the holidays is that tension and stress and anxiety affect the experience and the joy of the time. It's supposed to be fun, but instead it leaves my mom feeling stressed and anxious, which leads to lashing out. Or what about family road trips? I can't tell you how many stops we had to make along the road for the bathroom when we traveled with our preschool age kids. Or listening to Frozen in the background on repeat can cause any sane person to completely lose their mind. My stress level rises, which ultimately sets the tone for the whole trip. Maybe you can't relate to those stories exactly, but you know the feeling of stress that sometimes comes when surrounded by family. Even something that's supposed to be fun turns into a full-blown stress fest. Over the last couple of weeks, we've said that our stress is attached to something. Sometimes it's a big fear or direct trigger that's easy to pinpoint, like a presentation at work or an illness or a financial strain, but other times it's more ambiguous. Stress and anxiety seem like just a part of regular everyday life. You're not exactly sure where they're coming from or what they're attached to, but you know they're weighing you down. So we've said you have to follow your stress. You have to chase it down to see what's at the end of your rope. And what we've discovered is that when we find the things at the end of our ropes that are causing so much stress and replace them with God, we can better manage the things in our lives that threaten us with stress. Family is one of those things that can be incredibly stressful. And even if you can laugh about it later, the stress in the moment is very real. Left unchecked, it can do a lot of damage to you and the people in your family. Now, if you have a family that still has kids at home, this is huge. You've got a very short window, even shorter than you think, to raise your kids. Now, back during Jesus' time, children weren't really valued. They were seen as property. Sadly, this is still the case in many parts of the world, and in Jesus' day, children were disposable. If you didn't want them, you just left them out on the street to fend for themselves. Now, of course, we don't think that way because our culture is different, and that's not the example Jesus gave us either. Jesus believed that life had dignity. Christianity was a religion that elevated the role of people who culture often saw as lesser than, and that included children. Christianity, both then and now, basically says we see the image of God in all people, regardless of background, age, gender, social status, or skin color. In the book of Matthew, we find Jesus with his closest followers at the time, his disciples, and they came to Jesus and asked this question: who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, anyone with a little ambition can relate to this. They basically want to know which one of them is making the best grades, or up for that next promotion, or going to get that spot on the team, or going to win the race. It's a very natural human question to ask. And it's the one we ask with our families all the time, internally, if we're smart. Whose time is the most important? Whose opinion matters most? Whose contribution to the family is the greatest? Who should get first pick? Who should get their way? But Jesus turns the whole thing on its head. He knows something that the disciples haven't yet figured out. The way the world works is very different from the way God works. What we think is greatness is something totally different than what God thinks is greatness. And to show them that, Jesus does something totally unexpected for that time and culture. Jesus called a little child to him and put the child among them. Then he said, "I tell you the truth. Unless you turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven." This would have been shocking for the disciples. Children were supposed to be kept in the back. But Jesus is like, bring him here. Bring him up front with me. And then he gives all the adults a lesson that commentators of the Bible have debated for centuries. Now, there are a lot of things going on here, but I think Jesus is essentially saying, look at the quality of a child. If you've got a toddler at home, you can relate to what I'm about to say. Let's not picture this kid in their terrible 2s or 3s. Let's just not. Those ages are too hard. For the sake of our sanity and understanding, let's say this child is about 1 year old. They've finally stopped crying all the time, but they still need so much guidance, care, and support from a parent. They're learning so much every single day. They're wide-eyed and trusting. They don't have the ability to provide for themselves, so they depend on the person who cares for them to provide for their every need. Here's the point I don't want you to miss. It's what I think Jesus was saying to the disciples with this illustration. You need that same level of trust and dependence as an adult in your relationship with God. He holds up a child as an example of how we should trust and depend on God. Really, until they're late into their teenage years, and sometimes even well beyond that, your children are looking to you for everything. They're saying, show me, help me, teach me, care for me. And what Jesus is saying to us is that we should be looking to God in that same way. God, show me. God, help me. God, teach me. God, care for me. He goes on to say, so anyone who becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf is welcoming me. But if you cause one of these little ones who trust in me to fall into sin, it would be better for you to have a large millstone tied around your neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea. Look how much Jesus values children. He admires their humility and calls us to welcome them as if we were welcoming him. And should we betray their trust or be careless in our handling of them, well, we might as well be dead in the bottom of the ocean. Extreme language, I know, but I think the point is important. There's something so valuable about the trust of a child. It's so innocent, so unconditional, and so willingly given. And it's that kind of childlike trust that Jesus wants all of us to come to him with every single day if we really want to know God and enter the kingdom of heaven. But in the same way that there's something powerful about a child's trust, there's something just as powerful about a parent's anxiety. There's something powerful about a dad's outburst. There's something powerful about a mom's frustrated yelling day after day. There's something powerful about parents fighting, and there's something powerful about the way we let stress influence and impact our family. Now, I know Jesus is talking about children here, and not all of us have children, but hang with me. I think the principle Jesus demonstrates is something that could change the stress in your life, whether you're a parent, a single person with parents, a grandparent, a sibling, or just part of a church family. When it comes to family, we have to be so careful about what we do with our anxiety. And if you are a parent of kids of any age, we have to be so careful about the way we navigate stress and worry and fear in front of our kids. Because just as Jesus pointed out, they're watching, they're learning, they're looking to us to influence the direction of their lives. One of Jesus' disciples was a man named Peter. He was there in the crowd that day and heard what Jesus said. And years later, Peter was the guy who started the early church and became a leader in the Christian faith. Decades after he heard this particular lesson from Jesus, Peter wrote a letter to other believers. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Isn't it interesting that all those years later, after hearing Jesus talk about this idea, Peter remembered that it was humility that was the key to greatness in his life. If you want to be greater, you make yourself less. You humble yourself. When it comes to dealing with the stress and anxiety that's often present when we're dealing with family, we have to humble ourselves. We have to act out of humility. When you lose your patience with your kids, that's not acting out of humility. When you yell at your spouse, that's not humility speaking. When you gossip about someone in your church family, that's not humility speaking. When you let your stress lead your words and actions, you're not walking with humility. But we all know that not reacting out of stress and anxiety is a lot easier said than done in most cases, but especially with our families. That's why Peter gave us this next step. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. When you're tempted to throw your stress toward your family, throw it instead toward God. Give him what's at the end of your rope. Why? Because he wants you to. He cares for you. Cast all your anxiety on God, not your spouse, not your kids, not your family members. Cast it on God. He's not only the one best equipped for the job, but He's the one who loves you enough to take your worries on His shoulders. Of course, you can talk about your stress with your spouse or a friend or your small group, or certainly even with a counselor if the need arises. But at the end of the day, throw your anxiety on Him. Ask Him in return to fill you with the humility you need to be lifted up as a leader in your family. There will always be stress due to family. That is just par for the course. But that doesn't mean it needs to ruin the relationships. It starts with trusting God to care for us, much like the faith and humility of a child, and then to cast our stress on Him. He cares for you, He is for you, and He wants to write a better story for you.